Anna Runkle, thank you for joining me on the Mindful Movement podcast today.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
I was stoked when I saw your name come across our email. I've heard your name referenced, but I've never done the binge watching of your seem to be unlimited material and content that you put out there. You've obviously put a lot of work into it over the years. And the first thing I did was binge a little bit, and you sent me a copy of your book about to come out, Re-Regulated.
Set your life free from childhood PTSD and the trauma-driven behaviors that keep you stuck.
So I haven't had time to go through the whole thing, but I have spent some time on that document, and a lot of it definitely resonates with me, and I'm sure it will with our listeners too. I want to ask you, I'm a little worried about asking you what brought you to this, because I feel like we could potentially have to clear the calendar for the rest of the day just to touch on that topic. So I didn't know if you had a abbreviated version of why you became the, I guess, self-titled crappy childhood fairy on YouTube.
Yeah, I do. In my method of healing from childhood trauma, the focus is on noticing your symptoms in present time in yourself. It's not so much about the past. So that's why you probably expected there would be a big backstory. There is a backstory, and I can tell you a little bit about it. I grew up in a commune in Berkeley, and at a time when Berkeley was pretty hectic, and my parents had just gotten divorced, and both my parents were alcoholics, and things got pretty crazy in our house with people moving in who were high, drunk, having sex on the floor, not appropriate for kids, and there was very low supervision. And before they were divorced, my mom would sort of run away from the family for a month at a time without any word of whether she was ever coming back. So the whole family was kind of always in a state of waiting and trauma from, where she was with her alcoholism. And I was the oldest daughter, so I had some pretty good coping mechanisms. I took care of the younger sibs, and I was a good girl, and I was a good student, and kept everything together as best I could. And it kind of went well, but towards the end of my 20s, it was starting to unwind. And the way that I had difficulty connecting to people or fitting in, or, I just couldn't make up for it with accomplishment and being clever and funny and pretty and things like that. I was pushing people away. And it came to a head one night. I just had I call it a trauma storm. I got attacked on the street randomly while I was walking with a male friend, and these 4 guys jumped out of a car, beat us unconscious. And I had a concussion. My jaw was broken. My teeth were broken. And then my mom died very shortly after that. And I already had a great big heartbreak going on. And that's what I call a trauma storm. So much happens at once that you just can't really keep it all in the bag anymore. And it seems especially the head injury triggered the decompartmentalization of all that childhood trauma and neglect that had gone on. And I kind of lost it. I just couldn't get it together. I couldn't read. I couldn't use the phone. I now know I had PTSD, and childhood PTSD, which is technically called complex PTSD, was coming out underneath it. So it was a crisis point when I had to find help. I was in therapy 3 times a week. It wasn't helping. I was taking... Pardon? I was 30. Yeah. And I took the medication the doctor prescribed. And I now know that because I have complex PTSD, all that talking about what happened and trying to medicate away the anxiety was probably causing more harm than good for me. It was preventing me from being able to recover from what was happening. And so that's when I found something that did work.
Well, it's awesome. And as we've mentioned on this podcast before, from the wound comes the gift. It sounds like you've helped a lot of folks.
Yeah. What I found was a technique to express fearful and resentful thoughts and feelings in writing, not to have to talk about them all the time. When you have to, even if you go to therapy 3 times a week, when life is that hard, I was just like leaking my trouble on everybody, and it was pushing them away, and they couldn't fix it. It was going on in here, so they couldn't fix it. And so I look back now and I think, yeah, that was a misunderstanding of the problem, is that I needed to keep telling the story. I needed a way to feel better right now. That's what I needed. And so a friend, she was an acquaintance really, and she said, well, I'll show you what helped me stay sober. And she showed me something that she had learned in AA. Not everybody in AA does this, but it was like a way to do the steps every day. And she showed it to me, and it was a technique, and I still teach it. I've adapted it for people with trauma, so it's not a 12-step thing. But you name your fearful, resentful thoughts and feelings on paper, and then ask for them to be removed. And some people who are they consider their higher self to be the highest thing, they release it. So you can adapt this to your system of belief. But it's a way to express what those things are without re-triggering it through speech, which we now know is like, that's a thing. That's why people who have had trauma do struggle, don't show very good progress from conventional treatment. Talking about it can re-trigger the neurological dysregulation, which is kind of the core problem that I teach about. So I did that, and then she said, now go learn meditation. And there's a combination of expressing it in writing regularly, at least a couple times a day, or 100 times a day if needed, and then meditating a couple times a day. And I have so much, she didn't tell me what to expect, but within 2 weeks, I was up out of this like terrible depression and dysfunction I was in. I was feeling so much more hopeful and clear-headed, and I could pay attention better than anybody in the room at work. And I had a choice about what I said to people, and then I had just, years of learning to do about how to be a human being, because living with trauma and kind of trying to come up with a fake persona that gets along with everybody and hide what's down there, you end up with a lot of life problems. And I did. A lot of areas of my life were full of problems, and that took more time to change. So that's why my book emphasizes, you get re-regulated, and then you take on the trauma-driven behaviors. And I found that hard to get help with those.
There is a lot there. I'd like to touch on a few of these things. I definitely want to learn more about the writing and meditation component, or the take you have on it. But before that, it's something interesting you mentioned, that the idea of talking about it can be problematic. And I guess everybody could see how saying and putting, the energy of those words into the air, back into your ears, could obviously make you think about the event when really it's about like getting better. I remember I work in a gym environment, and I had a colleague say something to me once where, there was a client that was really frustrated that like their body wasn't operating as they, desired, and creating a lot of like suffering, and wanted to know why. And my friend said, if you're driving from here to there and there's a log in the road, you don't necessarily need to figure out who put it there, why it's there. The goal is to get to point B and focus on that. And I wonder if there's something to be said of like just doing something that makes you feel better right now. So it sounds like the tool that you're using is anchored in that, like just start to get better right now.
Well, you need to feel better in order to process information. That's a lot of what complex PTSD does, is it actually impedes the ability to process thoughts and feelings. They get very jammed up in there. Now, the science is only out in the last decade or something on that. So now it explains what I intuited from my experience. I felt very, jammed. I felt like my radar was jammed. I couldn't tell what was going on. It seemed like I was wearing headphones with loud noises coming through when I don't mean literally, but when I'm trying to be present in the room and read the room and hear what people are saying. It's very difficult to do when all these feelings and thoughts are always bouncing around, and it makes you reactive. It makes you not present, and it's overwhelming. But the thing about the talking about it, not only are you bringing back a negative thing, and I honestly think that a lot of people who intend to help us have been trained that you're supposed to talk about it and it will make it better. But that would be the perspective of somebody who doesn't have this. There's a neural pathway for speech that's different than the neural pathway for expressing yourself in writing. So when I have to make a video, when I'm making a video about something like something that's a bit triggery for me, I write it and I read it in a teleprompter. And then that's neutral for me. I can do that. It doesn't trigger the neurological dysregulation. And that's the piece, that's part of what's come out in the past 10, 15 years is that dysregulation is at work. When I learned about that from Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, it was like the second epiphany, the big epiphany of my life. It's a thing. It has a name. It's part of complex PTSD, which is another name I didn't have. And I matched the description exactly. And so I was running around when I learned that, telling all these people I had been teaching my practice to. You know, I taught hundreds of people by that point, one-on-one. But which is a lot of work. It was taking about 20 hours a week. And then I said, you know what it is? And I was going to a 12-step program for families of alcoholics, which I definitely qualify for. And it was helping in a certain way, but it wasn't dealing with the dysregulation. So dysregulation is, I'll break it down in a moment. But when I learned what it was and that it had a name, this huge weight came off of me. Like, I'm not crazy. I'm not making too much of this. I have totally normal standard symptoms for somebody who grew up the way I did. And then I put it on a blog and I put it on YouTube, and thousands of people started to respond back to me and go, that's exactly what I have. Nobody's ever nailed it like that. So it's a thing. It's a thing. And it's so liberating when you know, you're not just some sort of person who has these random, flaws of character. It's a normal set of symptoms.
How do you define that dysregulation, that term?
So your nervous system governs your body, and in many ways, I'm a spiritual person, so I don't regard the body as everything to my being, but my nervous system governs so much about it. And I've had an opportunity to kind of feel the dimensions of my nervous system because of the way it gets dysregulated and then re-regulates. You get a sense of yourself, and everybody gets dysregulated sometimes. Your brain waves, all the functions of your nervous system are prone to getting out of whack, out of sync. And that could be the electricity in your body changes, your heart rate, the release of hormones comes out in odd amounts, not balanced. And so you end up with too much cortisol that's killing you, or too much adrenaline, or not enough adrenaline. And it can dysregulate when puberty comes. It can dysregulate your immune system. People who had childhood trauma have a direct correlation, the severity of trauma with the probability of getting an autoimmune disease. The ability of your body to carry blood flow to your tissues, to do everything it does, cell function. And so people who have had heavy childhood trauma, which is neglect or abuse, it can be a lot of things, but that's the two big buckets. Neglect is particularly powerful. We're the most expensive people for the healthcare system and for the penal system and for the social services. There are so many problems that are brought on, and everybody thought it was just psychological or behavioral, or you just didn't learn, your parents didn't teach you. And of course that's part of it, but primarily it's a neurological injury. So it's very hard to function normally. You can go take a class in anger management, but you can't remember what they talked about because you get all dysregulated when you talk about things that are emotional. So when you can learn how to re-regulate your nervous system, all of a sudden you enter into the arena of everybody else, and you can try things and learn things and set boundaries and learn and experiment and remember, and everything can change, including connecting with people, earning money, things that have a very tangible effect in what the course of our life turns out to be. Another thing we can do finally is meditate.
Before I move on to there, a couple things stuck out to me there. I mean, when you mentioned you get to feel the dimensions of your nervous system with the practice, where I guess essentially you're being able to observe the self and how you respond to what's going on in your environment, whether it's your internal environment or external environment, and then you talk about the direct relationship where when people have childhood trauma, that correlation or association with autoimmune conditions, and you think of what the autoimmune condition really means. It's like an inappropriate relationship to the self. It's like your body misinterpreting what is the self and not treating it right, which is like shown up in actions and behaviors in the real world also in some way, commonly, like this dysregulation of kind of how you are in the world is happening on like a cellular level too, where your immune cells are literally misinterpreting, having an inappropriate response to like yourself.
Yeah, we can't function in our own best interest. We can't even recognize our own best interest. It's kind of shut down. It becomes inaccessible or drowned out. That's my experience of it. But there's very obvious signs of dysregulation. They're not all palpable. Like I can't tell what's happening with my, estrogen level or anything. I can't consciously tell, but I can tell. And one big effect is dysregulation can affect how your body handles insulin. So childhood trauma is a huge driver of obesity and diabetes and hypertension and things related to metabolism as well.
Is that just because of the chronically elevated stress hormones associated with it, or drive?
I don't think it's perfectly understood yet, but there's an endocrine change. I've noticed since I was a kid that people look at things through a lens, when they're trying to interpret like Stone Age anthropology. If you ever look at when I was a kid, they were like, the men always did this and the women always did this. And I was like, but how do you actually know, who did what? Do we know that? And it shows up in medical literature a lot. And I think it's one of the things that's shown up about trauma where they go, I used to get told this stuff. I'd be like, I don't know why I just keep like getting into these terrible relationships with people who are unavailable and don't really care about me. And I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. Like I'm trying my hardest. I'm not stupid. I'm a good person, And they would be like, well, you're trying to recreate your childhood so that you can win this time. And I would think to myself, I guess I better contort my whole belief system to go along with this kind of demeaning idea that I would do that to myself. Of course I wasn't trying to recreate my childhood. That's crazy. I'm not trying to recreate it. I wanted a good life and a good relationship. But there are neurological malfunctions that happen when you were traumatized, and especially when everything you're doing to try to get better is actually antagonizing it, making it very hard. Just one of the things that can be really harmful towards somebody who's doing the process of re-regulating is, saying beliefs like that, just things that aren't really true. And so I have a huge online community, and we have a membership, and we have these massive Zoom calls every week, and we have these rules, like you can't give unsolicited advice. You can't just be like, you have to try EMDR. I like EMDR, but I never tell anybody what they have to do, because so much of recovery is to start to receive the signals like, this feels helpful to me, this doesn't. I thought this was helpful, but now I don't like it. Like all of that, we get to have that experience now. And we make space with the daily practice to quit messing with it, to just allow ourselves to have our feelings and experiences, get it released, and then see what turns out to be very important to us. Some stuff will evaporate, some will become important. And who your real self is has space to come out then. So I really hold lightly everybody's opinion, including mine, about what's wrong and what you do about it. I think we're going to learn a lot as the decades roll by. But I know what feels better. I know, my signs of dysregulation, my nose gets numb, my handwriting changes. My hand coordination becomes really poor. I trip on things. I drop things. I feel dire. A little irritation is like, oh my God, someone's cut me off on the freeway. It just all of a sudden elevates. A sense of urgency comes in. So I have clues when I'm dysregulated, and what I know about my clues, and people have something like that similar, is maybe pause. Don't drive a vehicle when if you can't feel your hands, pull over. It's dysregulation. It is something like being drunk. Your whole brain is not on. And literally what's happening is the left front cortex, where reasoning is supposed to happen, is becoming less active. The right front cortex, where the emotions are happening, is becoming more active. And that's exactly what it feels like. Just like a very emotional reaction to something where you can't quite think straight for a while, and then you recover. So if you can learn to recognize it's happening, pause, and use tools to recover as quickly as you can change how this all plays out. And that's the secret of re-regulated.
That sounds great. I know personally I've gained insight on what triggers me, and the response from watching it, paying attention, trying to understand what's going on has dramatically reduced the effect. It doesn't mean I never get triggered, but it just doesn't have the same weight that it did. You mentioned a symptom I don't know if I've ever heard. That's really interesting. But I guess it lines up with the whole left brain, right brain changes. Your handwriting changes, I assume for the worse.
Yeah, it becomes hard to control my hand, I guess.
It's wild. And your nose goes numb, you said?
Numbness in hands, feet, face are common. Mouth.
What are other, some of the more common physical signs that you see with the people you work with that you feel stem from that dysregulation?
Well, it's very common to have things like migraines, digestive disorders, reproductive disorders. All of, these are, I think this was also psychologized or magical thinkingized in the past, but there's also I love things. I'm a very spiritual person. I believe in God. I came to believe in God as a result of recovering from CPTSD, and that much change was possible. I knew there was something huge at work. But I love it when science accords with what I'm understanding, on a spiritual level, so that I can understand, because of course it would, right? It's not like the changes in the body are not just happening on an abstract plane. They're happening in the body, so you would see measurable changes there. So a lot of the dysregulation-related illnesses, and it's basically everything, all chronic disease is exacerbated by trauma. And I've had some serious health problems in the past, and that's gradually how I've learned how the relationship of the trauma, not just in the past, as a person with trauma, I go through these episodes where I re-traumatize myself. I used to. And when life gets really hard, I'll start to have health problems. And people call that stress, but there's something even more specific going on, is that as I understand it, the anxious and angry, thing going on with me is actually activating or deactivating normal body functions. So, for example, I had a really difficult first childbirth, and I ended up really injured, and there was a medical mistake in the whole thing. And I had 14 major surgeries to try to fix that. And every time I had surgery, they'd go, "This should have worked. Why are you in the 1% it doesn't work for every time?" Well, what was going on is, my husband had left. I had these 2 little kids. I lost my job. I was freaking out. I had a lot of childhood trauma coming out. And it's like my body couldn't move blood cells to where they needed to go for the surgical repairs to hold. They would always just sort of fall apart. So it was that. There was definitely trauma involved in the whole thing. But in a weird way, when people would spiritualize my health problems and just be like, it wasn't just spiritual. There was a problem. There was an injury there. There was a reason my blood couldn't go there. And that really helped me to validate myself that it was okay. Now, I didn't expect to heal from that, but it got so bad. And I had to have medical devices implanted, and I had a lot of problems because of this. And I had accepted it. But because my life was such a struggle at that time, when I was a divorced mom for 9 years before I remarried, and I'm happily remarried now, which came as a result of healing, not the other way around. I didn't heal because of the marriage. But yeah, I had a very rough go of it, and I lost of hope and faith that all this writing and meditation was doing anything for me, and I quit. And then my life actually got worse, and I didn't notice it at first. I was okay for a while, and then things started to get very bad. And I hit a point. I had gotten into a relationship with somebody who I didn't realize it, and then I did realize it. He was a heroin addict, and he was hiding it. And I had kids, and there was no way I could continue that relationship. But for a person like me who got abandoned as a kid, it was very hard for me to manage that situation. And he ended up overdosing and dying. And it was such an upset to my life. I was trying to give CPR to him. I had to call 911. I discovered him in his apartment like this. And the police came, and first they had to check out, did I kill him? And I remember standing there just going, what has happened to me? What is going on? I was somebody who tried very hard to keep my life together and be a good person and a good mom, and things were just going down. And that's when I came back to my daily practice. I had quit for 2 years. I came back. And if I hadn't quit, I wouldn't have understood what it was doing for me. It wasn't just like this magic moment that started one day. I found out that day to day, every time I sat down to write and meditate, it was fixing something in me. Now, this was 20 years ago. I still didn't have a name for it. But then 10 years after that, the name came. I had complex PTSD. Big traumatic things like that really mess me up. And I need tools to get re-regulated. That's how it works.
It's amazing. I mean, I was real sick for a while too, and very different type. But I remember for a while I had issues with Lyme disease and mold toxicity and parasites and all this stuff, and it manifested in all kinds of crazy ways. But on like the journey of healing and talking to so many people, or at least listening to so many like success stories, anything that would inspire me or give me like a little gem in a conversation that I could apply to my life, something became very apparent that when you listen to people that went through these terrible like physical manifestations of illness, it wasn't a coincidence that there was like, it was at a time of stress. And when I look back on mine, like I didn't necessarily know how much underlying chronic childhood stuff was built into some of the like family related stress I had going on. So like I did not connect that dot for quite some time, but there's something to it. Like people, like in the Lyme disease world, people say like I was fine until I lost, a loved one, or I got fired from the job, or got divorced, and it's like that's not a coincidence. Like you might have got bit by a tick 30 years ago, and it was just dormant. Your immune system was fine, or whatever, and then like when you're under enough stress, when you have that, as you called it, the trauma storm, where they're under sleep because their schedule's too much at work, their marriage falls apart, and now their schedule's even crazier, dealing with the kids themselves, and all this stuff will happen, and then they get sick. I would say 95% of the time I'm 95% better. I mean, I have like a couple real lingering come and go things, but I mean, I've come a long way. Yeah. For a while, I would say it dictated my life. One of the manifestations was like skin problems, like head to toe. And that was just kind of debilitating, where like it just dictated anything that you did for the day was like hinged on like how well you were dealing with or coping with having a rash all over your body that wanted to tear your skin off. I mean, so it was a journey, but I was really amazed along the way of what I was able to learn about how, like, the fact that my parents split up when I was 4, like, played a role in that. And, like, the relationship with my father, how it was, like, just so, I don't know if toxic's the right word, but it was just so jacked up on so many levels. And we were having, like, absolute blow up of our relationship right around the time that I got sick. Like, and it took me a while. And part of, one of my coping strategies for a long time was alcohol, which has this ability to be a very useful companion when needed and help you cope through stuff by disengaging you from your stress. So like you don't really know why you're using, you don't know that you're using alcohol to soothe a childhood thing, and you don't know how that's affecting you until you stop and you could see it. So a lot of my like realizations of how I was affected by my childhood stuff happened when I got alcohol out of the way, because I was a daily drinker from a very young age, like 15, and now I think I'm 8.5 years clean now. But like being able to look back is like I wouldn't have memories come up of what happened or why until I didn't have the thing that was helping me hold those memories down out of my life. And then I could start to see, oh, wow, I'm affected by that. Like, no wonder if I get a text from my dad, I get a jolt of adrenaline and, I my blood pressure spikes before I even say hello. And I love him. Like, it's not I don't want that to happen. I'm not like resentful. I understand he did the best he could with the tools he had at the time, and he has his own, I don't know, unprocessed childhood trauma, whatever, his own story. But I still couldn't like not be affected when I would see the text come over or whatever. And now that's gotten a lot better as I've practiced similar things to what you're alluding to. I mean, I didn't follow the same protocol, but meditation played a big role. If I could read my handwriting better, I might write more, which makes me think, yeah, I want to get into the next, which makes me think, like, that's another thing that popped up when you said your handwriting got worse when you were dysregulated. I'm like, well, is my handwriting sucked because of that? I still haven't cleaned up that, like, part of my brain. And one of your videos I watched talk about, like, the role of clutter. And that resonated with me because, man, like, it scares me because if I lived by myself, no women, I live with 3 women in the house and a support crew, really. And I don't trust how cluttery, like, my space would get if it was just me. I don't trust my ability to keep it managed. And somebody says, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And like, I run a gym and it's beautiful. Like, when you walk in, it's amazing. If you open the closet door to the gym, it tells such a different story. And it's like, oh yeah, there's a part of my brain that is just like that closet. Like the closet in my, if you walk in our bedroom, it's beautiful. If you walk in my closet, it's like mayhem. And I wonder, actually, can you elaborate on that a little bit? The relationship of like clutter, whether it's in like physical space or the mind, whatever.
That video, it took off like a rocket, like nothing else I've ever made. And I make videos with equal care, every time. But that one, I've made like 800 of them, and that one just took off. It changed my life. It brought in so much wonderment to the company, and so much good stuff happened. But I was writing about 5 level. I just said I have a hypothesis because a lot of the research about clutter is that it's caused by depression, or it causes depression, it causes anxiety. And I was like, what if it's the other way? I'm iconoclastic. I love to question these things. What if it's the other way around? And what if trauma causes clutter in your mind, for sure. It causes cluttered emotions. It causes like, I have a lot of time with time management when I'm dysregulated. I can't tell. Like, it's a joke in my house. All of our pots and pans are ruined because of me. I forget that they're on the stove. I can't keep track of time. I have to smell smoke before I go, oh, my thing is done. And that's a dysregulation thing. And so I was like, let me go zoom out a little bit here. I heard a theory. I don't know if it's officially true, but I think it is, that our nervous system is a node on a great big nervous system. That's what it is. That's that oneness I've experienced before during very special moments. The way all life is connected, and even inanimate things in this universe, we're connected. And it's our nervous system that's part of it. It's a node, and we're in communication with it. And that's why there's a collective consciousness. That's why if you've ever like sat in a high hotel room in New York, I have, and looked down at all the cabs, at the way they drive, and then on the street you go, why aren't they all just like scraped to shit along the sides? The way they drive. Like, well, how is that? They're all just like okay on the sides. Clearly people have some kind of nonverbal communication going on a very casual, not woo-woo level. We just can kind of tell you're coming into my lane. And the more I write and meditate, the more I'm tuned in. I go, yeah, there it is. I feel it with the other drivers. And when somebody's not dialed into that, it's very like, whoa, watch out for this person. They're not sensing, what's going on. And I read the work of a researcher named Digby Tantum sometime back, who proposes it's called the interbrain. And his area of research is autism, and says, people with autism can't fully participate in the interbrain and that nonverbal communication. So I noticed that complex PTSD makes people have symptoms that are a little bit like autism. They're not the same thing. They have a very different origin, but where it's very hard to read the room, it's hard to read the signal, you feel like you didn't get the memo. You walk into the classroom in high school and you're like, everybody seems to know how to be all jovial with each other. And I feel self-conscious and I don't know what to say with these people. And so of all the explanations out there, when I just heard you don't have the Wi-Fi password, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it is. That's what it's always been. And so I have a second book in the works right now that is about that, the injury to the ability to connect. It's quite marked in people who are traumatized, and especially people who are neglected as kids, because there's a lot of emotional, psychological, and neurological development that is supposed to happen as a result of interaction with your parents, with attentive, loving, corrective, guiding, teaching, responsive interaction with your parents. So when you're not getting that, your brain can get stuck in weird modes. But there's a lot we're the living experiments. There's a lot you can actually recover from. I always say some of the neurological injury of abuse and neglect is like having a cold, and you can rest and it will get better over time. Some of it's like having a splinter. You can take it out and things get better over time. Some of it's like losing a leg, and you're going to have to get a prosthetic. You're not going to grow another leg. And I don't think that we can really, this is the saddest thing, but if you were a child and whatever you didn't get, you're not going to get it now. And other people can't give it to you. And trying to make partners do it or therapists do it or bosses do it is a futile game.
Yeah, that's well said. My wife puts it like sometimes you have to mourn the loss of the parent that you thought you deserved, but you didn't have, and learn how to love and accept the one you do have. So it's not contributing to holding you down, just changing that perspective, the energy of the outlook of that situation.
Some people, I'm not one of them. I do love my parents, but I went through some rough stuff with them. And I would say my mother left the planet, 30 years ago without ever, giving me what I needed. So I was kind of forced to find out that I could heal anyway. And I serve a lot of people who are traumatized, whose abuse was so bad, they really cannot have contact with their parents. And it's not appropriate for them to just accept and forgive and love them anyway. They can, it's a choice to do that. I do favor taking it one day at a time though, because you never know what can change. And, but I really support people who have to stop the contact to that. I respond to letters on my YouTube channel twice a week, and I got one, I read it on Monday, I think, and I couldn't stop crying. I was crying in the middle of taping. This person's story was it just killed me how his parents treated him. It was terrible. And how he was trying so hard, but he had never had a romantic relationship, and he was my age, and I just cried. It was sad. He just wasn't going to get it back. And his parents should rot in hell, honestly. There's no need for him to accept them.
Unbelievably unfortunate stories. I mean, we just don't, we never learn how to, the skills of parenting. It's not, you can get luck. There's a lot of luck to it. It's not ingrained in society or our culture where it's just part of a process of growing up that you gain a clear understanding of how to approach, a framework to approach parenting. So, hurt people. If you're raised by people that have been hurt really bad when they were young, there's a real high probability they're going to hurt you, maybe unknowingly. And it comes in really wild, unfortunate forms. And I've heard plenty of stories myself that it's just how are there people out there like this? And then how do you bounce back from that? And then there's one story that I just think about. This guy who was a member of the gym I owned for a while, and it was a little different because it was this awfully traumatic experience, but it was him. He was 15 and was driving a car and had an accident, and his mom and his brother didn't survive the accident, but he did. and then forever just didn't believe he deserved to live. And you just imagine how you would treat yourself in that situation. Like, it comes in so many forms, and those are extreme. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is, I mean, you mentioned you were the oldest sibling, and like, it could come really subtle where you don't even necessarily remember an instance of a problem. Like, there was no event. It's just maybe you had a responsibility where you felt an urge to take care of your siblings when you were young in a way that a kid shouldn't have.
That could happen to somebody. In my case, it was because the baby cried all night and there was nobody to make a bottle for her but me when I was 6. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily to be that extreme for somebody to like play a certain role, I guess.
Yeah, with an emotionally immature parent or.
Yeah, it could be in a way where you don't really notice, even as an adult, that there was necessarily a problem. You've just created behaviors and actions that are born out of like these beliefs that you developed about yourself at a young age unknowingly, because you were trying to survive whatever way you knew how. It helped you survive when you were little. Let's talk about more positive. Anna, let's re-regulate. So the daily practice, writing, not talking, but writing. You started okay. Gotcha. You started to elaborate on like how even the handwriting, like, wasn't even important to be able to read your handwriting. How do you approach this writing portion of this daily practice?
It was as you sit down twice a day, usually first thing in the morning, and then again sometime in the late afternoon would be ideal, twice a day. And you just catch up. You clear the windshield of the wet leaves, the fearful, resentful thoughts that are cluttering up in there. So if you've been having a rough time, there's a lot. And I'm somebody who wakes up with a lot. I wake up with a lot of like downloads, kind of like ideas and things to do today. But I also wake up very prone, often it's called an emotional flashback. The therapist Pete Walker came up with this word for it, where an old emotional state that's probably pre-verbal comes up and just overtakes you, and you don't even know why, but you project it on everything. My emotional flashback has a very common theme of, do I have to do everything around here? You can totally guess where it came from, but that's not consciously what it feels like. It feels like it's really the case, and I can be just a real pain in the butt to the family, when I'm just running around. Did you do this? Because if you didn't, I have to do it, and I already have to do everything. And my husband figured out pretty early in our relationship, he would start scooching away from me. So I recognize I'm in a flashback by his face. He gets a face of just like going, woo, here she goes. Then I know I'm doing it, and I can, if I care, I do something about it. I stop, and that's the caring thing for me to do, is to stop and re-regulate. We have language we can use to do that. But then I go and write. Writing is a good thing for me to do. There's emergency things you can do, like put your hands in hot water, put your hands in cold water, go outside and just move around a little bit. Some things to give a little jolt to your nervous system to help it reset and get out of that bad stuck groove. It's a nervous system like pothole falling into an emotional flashback. And so just remembering this is a state of mind, I can come out of it. I will see things differently when I come out. It takes self-discipline, because when you're having dysregulated thoughts, like I have to do everything and no one cares and life is so hard, it's just, the way that it shows up is so compelling that you're absolutely convinced it seems so real. Or the thing that's a real relationship killer is, why can't you fix me? I feel this way. It must be you making me feel this way. And it's not always the other person making you feel that way. It's coming out of left field. They don't even know what's happening. They don't know what they did, and they certainly can't fix it. So it's about learning to just take your tools, own the problem. If you have a problem in your relationship, and we all do from time to time or more, it's going to go much better when you try to address it from a regulated state. So we sit down, we write the fearful, resentful thoughts, and I'm not going to be very specific. It takes about an hour for me to teach how to do it exactly, and exactly is very important. What a lot of people do, they see some video with me talking about it, they go, I'll just write my fearful and resentful thoughts, which is basically like written ranting, and ranting will exacerbate the fear and resentment. So it's a specific format to help you process it. Process means get it out of active engagement with your adrenals to making it be a memory or something that you anticipate, but not something that's activating your whole trauma response. And you don't have to know that that's what you're doing. You don't have to think about your brain or nervous system while you're doing it. All you have to do is name them. But it's then the spirit of the thing, the sign off. We write this thing at the end to ask for it to be removed. And so I lead these large calls every week for free for anybody who learns it. Hundreds of people come. And a lot of the questions I get, my book, I have like really great FAQs through it. There's a whole chapter on the daily practice and a big appendix with all the FAQs. But like, why do I just put the negative things? Shouldn't I put gratitude? And no, you should not. And how can I make this, what else should I do to release this? It's like nothing. Just write it and express a written intention to release it. And that's enough. You don't have to do more. I tell people to shred up the paper so that other people don't read it. And a lot of people mistake that for shredding it up is what makes it go away. I'm like, no, it's your intention to release it and to have it removed that makes it go away. And I try to help people own that. So those are some principles at work in doing it. If people do this, I've taught so many people over the years, and I was told this, but I really believe it based on my experience. If people just write their fears and resentments, and, when I first got started, it was like 10 pages, 7 pages in the evening. It was a lot. I had a lot of feelings coming up. I was so upset, and I had lost so many family members and relationships falling apart. And I was scared, and financial, fears and health fears. And so a lot was coming up. If I hadn't had meditation afterwards, I would have collapsed. And that's what happens. People will just sort of give up the practice. You can't face all this stuff. You don't even know you're facing anything. Like writing it is so easy. You don't realize how much heavy lifting you're doing to face what's going on in here. And I had the pleasure of meeting somebody whose work has mentored my work, but I met him in person this year, James Pennebaker. And he is a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. And he's done 30 years of research, like thousands of peer-reviewed studies. Andrew Huberman did an episode on him less than a year ago. And he created something called expressive writing. It's a little bit of a different format and intention, but he documented that when people write about what's bothering them emotionally, the change is quite dramatic. And it even, he even like tested blood levels before people do this. And not only did their blood composition change right after writing about their distressing or traumatic memories, a month later, their blood was still different. There's like a lasting effect. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but the Huberman's podcast summarizes it, and Pennebaker's work goes into great detail on it. And so I told him what we were doing. What he noticed, because he was doing this with so-called normies, right? Not what he calls normies, but what I do. They weren't necessarily traumatized. They were college students or graduate students, and they were a mishmash of all kinds of people. But what I said, my concern about this, because his technique, it's like for 3 or 4 days in a row, you sit down for 15 to 30 minutes and you write about the worst thing that ever happened. And that's it. And yeah. So let's say there was a terrible car accident or something. And so you write about it. And like visiting that memory is pretty intense. And he noted that people would feel maybe tired or sad afterwards, but they could sort of cope with it. And I was like, my people, I know my people pretty well. I have a lot of engagement with my audience. I think a lot of them, it would be too much. You don't go right for the worst thing. You don't go right for it. In my technique, you write it as it comes. You don't ever have to go digging for anything. If you don't have anything heavy today and it's all just about what's in the fridge, that's fine. Or, fear I'm doing it wrong. That's fine too. Like that's what's bothering you, get it on paper. So less is bothering you. But so I said, well, we meditate afterwards. And the friend who showed this to me, she suggested I go learn transcendental meditation, and which I have the same teacher now. He now calls it Vedic meditation, which is, just off trademark, I guess. Different pricing. And yeah. Yeah. And it served me so well because as meditation forms go, I've learned several forms of meditation, but that one is the most sustainable for me just because I have a mind like a rabbit. I just, it's very forgiving. It's like I would tell my teacher, I fell asleep, and he'd go, and I go, I couldn't stop thinking, and he'd go, yeah. And I didn't have to like beat myself up about doing it wrong, and I could sit in bed and do it, and you're not really supposed to drink coffee, but I said, I drink coffee, and he's like, okay. That's my kind of meditation. It works for me, and I've been able to stick with it.
I mean, if you take the coffee away, then you got to spend the next however many months adding that to your fear list that you're writing about.
Oh, gosh.
The fear of no coffee.
One day, 2 years ago, I accidentally had decaf in the morning, and I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was like, I have a headache. I can't get out of bed. I was like, oh, I just need coffee. So I just totally don't worry about that anymore. I worry about sugar. I don't eat that anymore. And yeah, I know. Except when I like relapse and do it. And but it's a marked difference. That really matters. So I'm not like out for perfection or anything. I just want to be happy. I want to have a life. I want to participate. And this feeling, when I discovered what worked for me, this is like the main thing that I discovered what healing really is about. What healing is really about is becoming your full and real self. And I think too many healing endeavors focus too short-sighted. Like, we just want you to stabilize, or we just want you to feel better. It's like, well, yeah, you do need that. But you need to feel good so that you can become your full and real self. And if you can't access that, it's a sad tragedy. I think that our purpose in life is to be fully actualized with the gifts that we have to bring to the world. A gift, in my book, is something for the benefit of everybody that each person is endowed with. And it started to really like ping my conscience. Once I started getting better, I was like, I'm supposed to do more. And I started teaching my technique to people right away. And I was good at it, and I was making a difference in people's lives. But it's like my mission to teach this method to people grabbed me by the brain, grabbed me by the whole life, and was sort of pulling me along. Like I was tapped by something bigger than me to be a person. And so I notice I get a lot of feedback. That's a sign that you have a gift, is that you get a lot of feedback that something you're doing helps people. And so some people, they're so good at providing, medical care, where they're so good at creating order in their environment. Those are not my wheelhouse. But when I talk about healing trauma, like people flock to me. And first they filled up my living room. Then I did a blog. Then I did a YouTube channel. Now it's like 1 million people. And I can just say what a joy it is to be stumbling along, always making mistakes, but generally going in the right direction with my calling, which could only be, expressed in me through getting re-regulated enough to hear it and to act on it and not F it up much.
That's great. It makes me wonder, what do you say to someone that feels that they don't have some kind of greater purpose or something to actualize or something to give or serve?
Yeah, that's very sad if people aren't in touch with that. I think it begins to pull at you when I say still enough, like stillness. I remember before I had the daily practice and I learned like Vipassana, and that idea of stillness was not bearable for my traumatized mind yet, and not something that felt good to me. And so it's not the stillness, but it's less noise. And I like metaphors, and I mentioned the windshield. If you can think of all the like stuck, unprocessed, fearful, resentful thoughts as wet leaves stuck to a windshield, and you get in a car and you want to go somewhere, but you can't until you get on there and just like scoop all that stuff off and get it off. You don't need to put them in a catalog. You don't need to know what species they are. You don't even have to have a proper receptacle. You can throw wet leaves in the street. You can. They will biodegrade. It's okay. And that's what it is. Now you can see where you're trying to go, and you could actually like drive a car. And that's kind of how it works with getting free of this stuff. The kernel of who you are is in there. It's in there, but it can't be expressed, and you can't feel it or hear it because there's just too much going on. And a lot of what people are doing to self-soothe, like drinking, right? And even eating sugar. Also, cigarettes were big for me. God bless the things that helped us survive all of that. We needed it. And then comes a time when you'll be able to find comfort and ease another way, in a way that allows you to be clear-headed and, clear-spirited enough, if I can make up a phrase, clear-spirited, enough to feel what that is. So I knew I needed to write this book like 20 years ago, and I would just lay awake 3 a.m. going, why can't I do it now? And I just couldn't. I couldn't yet. And things came together. My kids got older. I remarried, so there was a little more financial security so that I didn't have to work every waking hour. And then the science came out. What is CPTSD? And it was like, and it clicked, and it just started coming out of me. So this is great. We're taping this. It's 8 days away. This comes out and hits the world, and it's the fulfillment of something that's been building in me for a long time, and I'm so grateful.
Oh, great. So the folks listening, you're probably hearing this right around the time that this book comes out. It's re-regulated. Can you read the subtitle one more time?
Set your life free from childhood PTSD and the trauma-driven behaviors that keep you stuck.
By Anna Runkle, the crappy childhood fairy.
Published by Hay House. Wonderful people.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Anna, I want to thank you for your time today. And you obviously have a lot to offer. And you have just a massive catalog of good content on YouTube. So I encourage people to check it out. And I look forward to taking a little bit more time with your book, going away for a few days. So I'll dive a little deeper into it. For the listeners, of course, always grateful for your listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And if you know somebody you think you would like it, please share it. Anna, thanks for joining me today.